gender representation in American culture and various professional fields. It works in partnership with lots of different institutions and produces exhibitions and educational programs that seek to consider gender inequality in a variety of different contexts. Here at the museum, we're excited to be able to have the debut of the Center's poster project, which is going to be an ongoing project. And, you know, here with this particular poster exhibit, we're also thinking a lot about, the Judith Center is thinking a lot about local issues and concerns. And if we think about the landscape of Michigan, in 2023, Michigan, along with several other states, passed laws regulating the use of AI in the electoral process. And so all of this is purposely coinciding with our current political season in the United States. And is a catalyst for conversation around technology and freedom and democracy. And so that's what brings us to our conversation today. As I mentioned, it's moderated by Catherine Andrews. Catherine is a Los Angeles-based artist working across mediums of sculpture, printmaking, performance, and more. She has a conceptual practice that's really grounded in gender theory, and she creates work that engages cinema, political propaganda, and art history to unearth complex relationships between people, culture, and power in our everyday lives. Catherine is joined today by 4 guests, each with a different disciplinary lens for what's going to be this cross-disciplinary conversation. Each guest offers a diverse perspective to our conversation, addressing the ways that the growing presence of AI is connected to the democratic process and beyond, and all kinds of space to talk there. As a university that's really involved with the development and growth of new technologies, you know, MSU offers a rich place to be talking about this, and we're fortunate to have several MSU faculty who are joining us. So first we have Anjana Sarsala, who's a professor in responsible AI at the Broad College of Business. Her interests include the responsible use of artificial intelligence, social media analytics, and the economics of AI. She's a regular commenter on the algorithmic bias, AI and digital transformation for a host of media outlets, from the Associated Press to the BBC to National Public Radio, Political, Wired, Scientific American, the list goes on and on. Thank you for joining us today, Anjana. Then beside Anjana, we have Melinda Billingsley, who is the communications manager at Voters Not Politicians. She has a background in political science and joined the Voters Not Politicians staff as the communications manager in April of 2022. Voters Not Politicians is a nonpartisan advocacy organization that works to strengthen democracy by engaging people across Michigan in effective citizen action. The organization was also key in the legislation, bipartisan legislation that Michigan recently passed that is looking to think a little bit more about how AI is being used within campaigning. Beside Belinda, thank you for joining us. Beside Belinda, we have Jillian Tang. JT is a MSU Foundation Professor of Computer Science and Engineering in the College of Engineering, and also Director of the Data Science and Engineering Lab. JT's research includes data mining, machine learning, trustworthy AI, and applications of all of those in a variety of fields, including education and biology. He's the recent recipient of many awards, including AI's 10 to Watch in 2022 and a National Science Foundation Career Award in 2019, plus a whole lot of others. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, JT. And last but not least, at the end, let's find it on my piece of paper. We have Nazita. So Nazita Levajarde is a professor, associate professor in the Department of Political Science, and her work focuses mainly on issues related to race and ethnic politics, political behavior, voting rights, and immigration. As an attorney and a political scientist, her research has been featured in media outlets ranging from The Atlantic to the New York Times, the Washington Post, Huffington Post, and also Media. So thank you for joining us. That was a lot of introductions, but as you can tell, these people have a lot to offer the conversation today, so we're really excited about that. Catherine, this is time to hand it over to you, and I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say.
A brief further introduction, then we'll get right into it. 2 years ago, I founded the Judith Center to create art-centric programming that spotlights gender discrimination in American culture. The center regularly invites thought leaders from many fields to come together and reflect upon specific topics. Thus our event today, titled AI is Impacting Democracy, with our brilliant panelists that Michelle mentioned. The Judith Center believes that while there are many forms of gender discrimination in the US, one of the most devastating is the underrepresentation of women in politics at the federal, state, and local level. Thus, we have chosen to debut our first major initiative, the poster project, which Michelle mentioned, which is on view here in the museum, only a short distance from the state capitol, where female politicians hold 75% of statewide executive offices, roughly 40% of the seats in the state legislature, and 47 of its US congressional seats. Michigan's doing well. Michigan is ranked number 14, incidentally, according to the Center for American Women in Politics, in terms of its representation of women. Incidentally, in the last few years, female politicians in Michigan have also been the target of a widely reported spate of violent threats. In conversation with the museum staff, we contemplated the relationship of that history to university life here in the current election season. It did not escape our attention that MSU is a cutting-edge institution vigorously engaged in the development of AI programming and study. In addition to thanking the museum staff who helped to organize today's programming, I'd like to personally thank Bree Holtz, the director of MSU's Ethics Institute, who knows of all things AI going on about the university. Bree informed us that currently hundreds of departments are actively engaging with AI right now here in their daily study. With this context, I'd like to start today's conversation with a very basic question that many of you may be wondering about. What exactly is algorithmic violence in the electoral space? Like when we talk about AI, violence in elections, what are we actually talking about? I'd like to open that question with Nazita, who has extensively researched the experience of minorities in the political space, including women, and especially women of color. Over the last year, Nazita has been doing firsthand research, speaking with politicians across the US about their experiences with violence. And I think it'd be wonderful, Nazita, to hear about some of the reports you've been hearing. Are politicians speaking mostly about traditional forms of violence coming their way, or is violence occurring through online platforms and these many other spaces trickling into their experience of entering the political realm?
Thank you so much for putting together this panel and for inviting us all to speak. So this past year, I've been involved in interviewing politicians at the local and state level all over the country, so different levels of political office. And in tandem with those interviews, I've also, with my colleagues, one of them is sitting here today, have fielded numerous surveys on politicians at the state and local level. And the purpose of this work was really to understand the rates of violence, the levels of violence, the intensity of violence that has been affecting our politicians at every level of politics. And what is incredibly striking is that we modeled our questions after what we were finding and what the police have actually been asking in EU countries such as Sweden. And in Sweden, we're finding that there is a disproportionate amount of violence that is targeting female politicians and that is driving them out of political office. What is really remarkable is that all of these efforts that we put together over the past summer and really half year have revealed to us that politicians in the US are facing levels of violence akin to that in the country of Colombia. So not as in other OECD countries, but much more aggressive, much more intensive than we've ever really actually surmised. Just to kind of give you a ballpark, 75% of state legislators report having been harassed over the past year. 44% of state legislators report having been threatened in the last year. The most intensive amount of harassment, intimidation, bullying, etc. was being reported by state legislators. But that's not to say that local politicians weren't experiencing either. So about 44% of local politicians reported being harassed in the past year, about 25% reported being threatened in the past year. And just to kind of build on that, I also want to share with you that all of this is also quite gendered and raced. So when we look at women of color, 70% of them reported being insulted in the past year, 59% reported being harassed in the past year, 39% reported being threatened, and I think very importantly, 7% reported being attacked physically in the past year. These rates are higher than for white women, men of color, and white men. So we are seeing something incredibly gendered and race, particularly when it comes to women of color in politics today. The next group that reported as much intensity and violence were white women. So this is something that is very gendered, but it's also gendered and race. And I think we really need to understand just how prevalent this type of violence is. With respect to technology, in our interviews, what was revealed is that a large portion of the harassment, insults, threats that are coming through are happening on social media. And what's really unfortunate is that many politicians control their own social media accounts. And so they're actually the people who are being affected most initially and dramatically by the contents of social media posts. And in some states, like in Florida, you're not actually allowed to block anyone. So traditional features of social media that allow people to deal with harassment online, like the blocking feature, which so many of these companies point to as an essential feature of maintaining civility and protection, is actually not afforded to politicians because that would be violating the constitutional rights to freedom of speech of their constituents. And so for many politicians, they actually cannot stop a harassment coming through depending on which jurisdictions they work under. What's also been really fascinating and horrific to learn about is the ways in which not only how harassment happens on social media, but the ways in which national figures who use social media can inflict online and offline harm that targets politicians of color. So for instance, I spoke to one politician who had been attacked by the former president online. And within moments, days, the far right was not only attacking him online, but was coming to his family's home, was attacking his family, was attacking his mother in particular. He had to leave his home and to go reside somewhere else just to provide an ounce of peace for his loved ones. And this is all to say that these tools can be really weaponized. They can be great in getting out democratic messages and showing constituents the ways in which you represent them, but they can also be creating very unsafe situations for our politicians. I want to just say that while social media is the most common type of violence that people are experiencing, it is by no means the most severe. So we can talk about this throughout, but I've spoken to politicians who have received death threats, who have experienced gun violence. I mean, we're talking about people chasing them off their yards with weapons. We're talking about people who have fired shots into city council meetings and nearly missed them. We're talking about people who've experienced a bullet coming through their window and nearly killing their infant child. We're talking about bomb threats, multiple bomb threats. So these are people who are actually serving at local and particularly school boards, city councils, who are experiencing very, very severe types of violence. And I think, it's important to recognize that a lot of things are happening online, but quite a bit is also happening offline.
And just a follow-up question, do you think the more traditional forms of violence are being inflamed by the presence of sort of online.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Without a
hate
doubt. I don't think I
messaging.
spoke to a single person who wouldn't say that they have experienced something online. Absolutely. Being online, being on social media makes people visible in a very unique way. And like I said, a lot of the tools that are afforded to many people to try to keep themselves somewhat safe online just aren't afforded to some politicians, or they don't even have the resources really to be able to handle the kind of volume that they get once they're made visible.
Actually, I want to interject there and say that, it's also that as users, the things that social media platforms do to curate the content or personalize, they know your political preferences. Social media platforms kind of make inferences about attitudes, about race, society. And so, let's say Facebook, there was that thing in, I think one was the 2016 election, where African Americans were being shown these ads that depressed voter turnout. So you take this kind of an engine that has unprecedented ability to make inferences about who does what where, and put it in the hands of a few private actors who are only not, it's not even, I don't even want to accuse them of anything. They are in the profit mode. But they suddenly, we trusted them with this, almost every aspect of our lives. How we make decisions, what information we see, what rabbit hole we fall into. We can fall into that Instagram bubble. So, there's, I think this columnist Kyle Chayka, who writes for the Mirror, writes beautifully. So he was writing something about, it's almost scary. If you like astrology, you don't have to believe in it, but you see a few astrology-related things, and soon you're on Instagram, and you'll be scared to step out of the house when some Mars is in some phase. It's like that. So what are you're getting these nudges, but we're also humans. How rational are we? We see all this information. So there is that person who is the teenager who developed a relationship with chatbot and committed suicide. Because, the tiny percentage of us who are lonely seeking companionship, they go to YouTube, and then they'll see all these radicalized, the messages that appeal to them. We don't have resources for loneliness. We don't have resources in the schools for someone to seek out disaffected children. What we have is all of us have smartphones, we have internet, and we have these platforms who are just have all kinds of information. Right? So of course toxic behaviors will result. And now we have AI that has the ability to make deepfakes. And then add all these potent things into the mix. Is there any surprise that we will see on this dystopian dysfunctional behavior? And yes, I apologize for if you had any hope left in humanity.
I'm pretty sure, Johnny, you're going to have one of the most depressing takes here, and we're going to get to that. I've got a question for you specifically about that. Jihyun, do you have a thought about one of the more dangerous or threatening forms of new technology out there in relation to this space?
Sure. Yeah, I'm an engineer, and my goal is to build tools to make people's life easier. I think in the past decades, something I'm very proud of we build algorithms, two key things. So one is the personalization. So personalization, our original goal is to help you to get something very interesting. For example, in the information overloading age, we want you to get something you like. Recommendations, search results, news recommendations, friends recommendations. But unfortunately, personalization is also has something bad. For example, I myself, I never thought about the technology we are building can use in an opposite way. For example, recently, of course, I'm not a U.S. citizen, so I cannot vote. I'm not very sensitive to politics. But recently, when I watch YouTube video, I always get some political ads specifically to one party. So I believe they use the personalization technologies to learn my preference, and then they will repeat the advertisement 100 times if you watch the videos until you make the decision. So this is one thing previously we are very proud of to help to make our life, even education, more customized, personalized. Something also can be leveraged in a better way. So a lot of things we are trying to achieve with automation, especially intelligent automation. We try to make a lot of things automatic, and in this way, it will save a lot of our efforts to help to do something we are really interested in. But unfortunately, automation is also leveraged in even worse way. For example, deepfake. We're trying to create some help you writing or drawing easy through those kind of AIs. But unfortunately, you also can leverage the technology, automation to automatically create fake news, deepfake videos, audios, and even those kind of multi-modality information. It's hard for human to distinguish between the real and the fake. I also, so the last time during the debate, the Trump debate, there was a shooting, and there are a lot of similar kind of news out. It's hard for me, especially I don't have such kind of background to distinguish which is true, which is fake. Later on, it turns out I get a lot of misinformation, fake news, even though I work on this area. So yeah, I think so. So that's why in the last 5 years, I tend to the education area. So basically, so if the algorithm has some false problem, we can make it fair. Technologically, we can build some algorithms to make the algorithm more fair. For example, 10 years ago, for the face recognition for white and black, the recognition difference could be 30%, even from the top tech companies like Google, IBM. But nowadays, we almost mitigate this kind of gap. There's no big gap in face recognition. So technically, a lot of problems we can use technically to help, but something we cannot help is human. Who use our technology? How do they use? So that's why I turn to education, hopefully to make the awareness of AI and the asking AI to education in this space. Yeah.
Thank you, Jilong. And we're going to come back to some of your points about multimodal LLMs. I'm impressed with my own command of these terms. I've been learning a lot. So, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I'll add very quick one thing, Jillian, what Jillian says. First 2 points I want to make. One, Jillian said, I can't distinguish between what is like real and fake. Studies have shown that scientists can't distinguish between real abstracts of papers published in journals such as Nature and fake abstracts. They can distinguish, but it's not high enough. So we cannot blame ourselves. We are in that point where we cannot distinguish between what is real, what is AI as a society. Second, what are the guardrails we want to build around our social media systems? Do we have adequate guardrails? Twitter removed all those guardrails.
A lot of banks are using AI to determine if people should be qualified to receive loans. So when there's a bias system that's denying minorities or women who historically have not qualified for loans, there's another example. Further, this was referred to earlier, facial recognition, and that's frequently now being used in policing as well, with a higher incidence of racial profiling, which we all know is a problem in the United States. I think that covers a lot of it, not all of it. There's more than that. Okay, so shifting the focus, we're going to come back to some of that. I'd like to talk for a second about who's being targeted. When we think of elections, I think many folks think about political candidates. Melinda, I wonder if you might speak for a bit in your activist work with the organization Voters Not Politicians, where you're very much on the ground helping to support legislative policy that's being crafted, where you're speaking with voters and all kinds of people out there who are involved in this process. What are you seeing in terms of who's at risk? Are you hearing anything beyond just politicians? So you have to share the mic.
So I think what we see is yes the politicians definitely receive a lot of threats and things like that. However, especially once elections are being run, early voting initiatives started last Saturday, and now we have election workers who are also in the crosshairs. And that comes from, like we mentioned already, social media and the way that national figures are able to just raise the temperature on rhetoric. They spread lies, misinformation, and it makes people just angrier, more emotional, more seeing threats themselves. So that when they, go into a voting space and they see an election worker who says, "Hey, you can't wear campaign shirts in a voting space," they might respond by punching that election worker, which is something that happened in Michigan within the last week of that happening in early voting. So basically, because we have all of this technology that has raised the temperature in electoral spaces, it has put more of a target on a lot of people's backs, and that includes people who are just literally doing their jobs. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how much, a poll worker, an election poll worker, is just, signing the form, hitting the ballot, they have no power here, they're just administering elections, and even they can become targets.
Thank you. And I also found in my research, according to the Brookings Institution, 80% of poll workers are women. So this has a huge impact, again, on women in this space. And there's been a 38% report of poll workers being threatened. That comes from the Brennan Center for Social Justice.
And then I'll also add to that, when we talk about how this violence is gender and with a race lens to it, if you think about when folks target specific communities, when a group of people show up at Huntington Place in Detroit, those poll workers are mostly going to be women, they're mostly going to be black women, they're mostly going to be older black women. I speak from experience as a poll worker in the city of Detroit, that's who's doing that work.
Thank you. That was my next question. I was curious. I think both you and Melinda and Nazita might have a perspective, a close-up perspective on how all of this is particularly affecting persons of color.
Can I just add that while there are, you have the expertise on poll workers and whatnot, but I will just say about state legislative candidates, so we also in our surveys included a sample of them. I will say that while these are individuals who are running for election to become state legislators in either sort of the House or the Senate of their state's legislature. And I will say that while the rates of reported violence did not reach those of people who are already in office, they were above zero. They were still pretty remarkable. It made me wonder, what is it about your experience that you are being insulted, threatened, harassed, intimidated, bullied, physically hurt, experiencing malicious impersonation, for instance? How is this even happening? And so even candidates running for state legislative office are experiencing immense types of violence. And I think it's important to recognize, yes, there are people who are elected or appointed who are sort of very visible, but then there's other people, as you've written here, candidates, poll workers, voters, they are also experiencing a great deal of attention and abuse.
Thank you. I'd like to shift for a second to explore a little bit about how large language models are having an impact in ways that maybe the average person doesn't understand. And I'd like to turn to Ji Liang a little bit. I know a lot of your work has been researching the performance of large language models, how they work, ways in which they're often used by individuals to learn things, but they reveal information that's perhaps incorrect, or they don't reveal information, but there are ways in which you can use them sort of against the way they're programmed to learn about specific outcomes of elections, things like that. So in our conversations, we began talking about a couple things that in the electoral space, maybe they're bad actors, right? There's like an individual that has an intent to harm, or maybe there's a foreign government that has an intent to mess with the U.S. electoral process. Could you speak to this sort of bad actor phenomenon first? We were talking a little bit about in the last electoral cycle, or several ago, the presidential cycle, how Cambridge Analytica was a sort of important player in terms of compiling research from Facebook to understand how voters might behave. But Ji Liang, you had some interesting ideas about that now and what's going on now around that.
Thanks. So I can briefly introduce a little bit technical about large language models. So large language models is actually what a large language model is doing is simple. Just give a sentence, we just predict what's the next word. And if you can accurately predict the next word, it turns out it can do a lot of things. For example, write articles and understand the conversations, to do the conversations. I think so. Definitely, large language models is one of the most milestones in the AI history. It will have a very a position for large language models. I think one way large language model will change us is in the future, our human-machine interactions will be changed. Instead of hand operations in the future, probably most based on conversations. So now, actually, this kind of change already happened. For example, Alexa. Now you can do the shopping through Alexa. And that's why my 4-year-old daughter, she can buy from Amazon, and sometimes she subscribes some services we even don't know. And once we receive the bill, and we receive the message, say, hey, so Alexa said, do you want to open XX service? My daughter said yes. So yeah, actually, this kind of convenience also brings a lot of challenges or ethical considerations of AI. So my research is very interdisciplinary. I work with professors and students from very different disciplines like biology, education. A few years ago, if they want to use AI, they want to work with us because there's still some technical barrier for them to use AI, like programming, like mathematical understandings. But in the last 2 years, with large language models, actually they can use AI directly. They just through the conversation, they can build a web page, they can create a figure, they can write a code by AI, and so on. So this is the convenience I want to mention. But unfortunately, any technical also has the bad side. Because of this kind of barrier removal, everybody can use AI to do what they want. Even some of them with this kind of malicious goals, like misinformation, fake news, deep news, and fake. So just mentioned, right? In the last election, so the team may hire some companies, some professional companies to do analysis and to do the targeting advertisement or some online campaign. They must pay and they must to hire some professional teams to achieve this goal. But nowadays, actually, everybody can be a bad actor because you can create something, some tools, some targeting things easily by yourself. So in this, actually, in early of this year, I was interviewed by some a TV, and actually I describe the large language model movement compared to information, like how can we receive or give information like social media. For example, before social media, the only way we receive information, probably newspapers, TVs. But with social media, everybody can publish anything at any time in social media. So now, with large language models, actually we also achieve this kind of moment. Everybody can use AI anytime, anywhere, through conversation. So that means the misusage, the better activities of leveraging AI, we need to pay more attention, much more attention compared to the previous years, because of this conversational interface. Yeah.
And now, and maybe Anjana, you might want to add to this as well, because you referred to it a moment ago. But I know we're moving towards the popularity of multimodal language models, which also use video, sound, images. So all of this gets combined as well. And I'm wondering about the impact on that on this problem of like discerning what's real, what's not real, and as you mentioned before, even the greatest experts can't tell anymore.
So this is where I have
So this is where I have an anecdote. I think just a few days ago, a reporter from Scientific American interviewed me. There is this tool, Notebook LM. Google has one Notebook LM. What does Notebook LM do? You can put papers, scientific papers. There's two different, I think the other, I forgot it. The other one is specific to scientific papers. Notebook LM can take any different data, can be Word documents, etc. What does it do? It generates a podcast with one male and one female. It generates a podcast and they're discussing each aspect. So I know about Notebook LM, it's buzzy. You know, people are buzzing about it. But what is it that I was like, oh my God, I can't see it. I'll tell you what is it. She took one of my papers and put it through Notebook LM. And she sent me an audio. And you know, I listened to that audio. And I was like, oh my God. Because it's like, I think that was like a very, this interview with her was also a very long interview. I don't know when it will come up. But what amazes me is like, when we are writing academic papers, we have to say, okay, these are some contradictions. So I consider myself a bit of one. I consider myself a well-read person, and I read, other interdisciplinary. I read papers like that. So I can quote things in other literatures. And I can compare against other stuff. Now, Notebook LM, supposedly the way it produces the podcast, the training is local. It is taking the data from what you have put into the notebook. But it has learned. There is a huge layer of learning inside. It is like this incredibly divine being that knows everything. Can relate it to something in some other field, some other context, and to explain it. It's incredibly powerful, but I also don't know what's the bad stuff. How do we, you got to ask me, how do you evaluate? You know, does this seem, my own study, it seems very incredible to me. I have to spend like 10 hours maybe to actually judge the authenticity of 20 minutes of audio transcript. Because I have to devise, researchers have to devise audit studies where we have very clear performance metrics and say by these dimensions Notebook LM is making these comparisons. Are they correct or not? There are methods like Turing test is essentially not very helpful anymore. There are some other Vinograd schemas. Those things also are not very helpful. So what are right metrics? What are the right ways to evaluate? And this is about, as I said, it's incredible capacity for doing good. But we also don't know what are all, and we have to really spend a lot of time thinking about frameworks. Collectively, we have to come together and create frameworks that say this is how to evaluate tools like this. I think that's the point I want to make in the context of democracy. When you start taking broadcasts, and you know how okay, maybe used to recruit terrorists, it may be used to increase violence. Okay, I mean, I always said, if you have any faith in
I gotta take this microphone away from you, Anjana, before we go too far down. We're coming back though. A couple things just came out through the conversation that I want to point to, and one is this question of how we discern what's real and what's not real. And in my research, I came across that some AI entities have been created to actually do that work, to discern what's real and what's not real. And I think that's interesting because we're coming to the point where maybe humans are no longer able to do any of this work of sifting through, and we're becoming more and more reliant on these algorithms to do all of that work for us. So I think that's one topic on the table. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. Ji Young, I can tell you have something you want to say about it, so let's come to you. But the other point I want to throw out is the way in which so much of what we've been talking about can thrive because it exists in a sort of culture of anonymity. Like, we're not sure who's creating these podcasts, who's creating these threats, who's putting out misinformation that gets circulated. And another thing I came across elsewhere in my research is one of the biggest problems out there is not the actual creation of the misinformation, but it's that users have a tendency to spread false content at a rate of 6 times faster than the truth. And MIT researchers have been looking into this, measuring how quickly retweets happen and what the propensity is for a human passion for novelty to sort of drive the spread of misinformation. So it's like we have these two problems. We have all kinds of stuff going on over here being created by bad actors or biased systems, but then we have the humans getting involved and just exploding it and making an even crazier mess out of it. So I wonder if you might add to any of this, Jilong, because I could see you had an interest. The topic of anonymity, the topic of coming to this point of the machines are having to do all the work, like we can't sort through it anymore, it's so overwhelming, as well as this human drive to just turn it into total chaos.
Yeah, I think so. The government realized this kind of threats, and they already take some actions. For example, in California, so if you want to publish your model, the model is to generate this kind of images or texts or even videos. So you must put a watermark on the content that you generated. In this way, they can detect So just like you have some copyright photos, you put a watermark there, and
Watermark?
Yeah, watermark.
Uh-huh.
So now, actually, California has this new regulation. So for those big tech companies who publish their big models, like OpenAI, ChatGPT, and so on, you must put watermark in the content. In this way, they can provide this kind of tools for normal users to detect whether this content is from model or from real human. But of course, there are still a lot of this kind of challenges, right? So on the one hand, as you mentioned, actually there are also some existing fact-checking websites. Actually, there are. For example, you received a message from social media. There are some websites you can check, but nobody do that because we are very excited by fake news, actually. So that's why you mentioned the spread much faster, like 6 times than normal information compared to misinformation. Because even there are some tools, and I mean, people just believe what they believe. They will not. Typically, like you said, some like surprising, fake or negative things typically can extract more attention in social media and spread much faster. So I think there are, in my opinion, the government is or are trying to put some force on this matter or this issue. But how? Of course, they can help, but still, in practice, we still need to improve the awareness of our public. So some information you receive probably are likely from models instead of the real users. This is super challenging.
I found there is a website out there, I'm sorry I don't remember the name of it, where you can look across, it's a map of the United States, and you can hit each state, and it shows all the laws that have been passed in relation to AI. And that takes us back to Melinda for a second. I'm from California, I live in California, and we've been very active. We have a lot of regulation. And all the big businesses are moving out of California to states with very little, so they can do all their algorithmic fun. But Melinda, I wonder if you might speak for a moment to this process of getting more legislation through, how challenging it is, how effective you guys are at recognizing the next thing that needs to be passed. Are you following are you following what's happening in other states? We know that the federal government has been very slow to enact legislation. It really struggles to get consensus. Could you speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll start with, as you're mentioning, just how accessible it is now to make deepfakes, things like that. One of the things my organization did when we were looking at like saying, hey, I think we should regulate AI. And to prove to you that we should regulate AI, here's a deepfake video of the last 3 Michigan governors saying things that are just like wild. Like former Governor Granholm saying, oh yeah, green energy, it's a fad. We should drill more coal. That's the future of energy policy. We had former Governor Snyder saying, I love unions, which, if you're familiar with Michigan politics, is not something Governor Snyder would ever say. The governor before those two, who I'm too young to remember the name of, but basically and to do this, it's not like we consulted with an AI company, we had a comms firm do it. It was weirdly cheap to get it done. And being able to produce that ad so easily, we use that to show the legislature that there's an urgency here. We did that last fall, and we're like, think of this, now in September, October of 2023. By the time the 2024 election really kicks into high gear, what is this going to look like? So because we were working with the legislature and putting the urgency behind them, we passed a package of bills last October, House Bills 5141 through 5145, if anyone wants to look them up. And basically what they do is require a disclaimer on any political ads that were made using AI, and specifically bans AI deepfake videos, so any like deceptive media within 90 days of an election. And there's some other things that like add penalties. If you do it too many times, it becomes a felony, such and such and such. So we worked with a coalition. Public Citizen was a big part of that. They came to us with legislation. We also worked with Representative Cernoglu's office to craft it, fine-tune it for Michigan. And then it was actually introduced as bipartisan legislation. So there were Democratic and Republican sponsors of that package, which I think really goes to show how widespread the issue is, and the fact that like nothing in America is bipartisan anymore. We don't pass bipartisan legislation, and there's usually a lot of fuss about it. So this shows that everyone was aware, like, oh yeah, nope, this can affect everyone. Does deepfake and AI technology, does it affect all political candidates equally? No. We can see the science behind that, but it can definitely affect both parties.
I wanted to go back to you for a second, Anjana, because I think we've talked a little bit about, well, AI is being used in these ways that has negative results. Maybe there's some ways emerging where it could be used more positively to discern what's actually factual and what's not. There was another example floating around about a gentleman involved with Pizzagate who recently produced a film on Zelensky, and it was privately funded. It was put out it was put out to like, I don't know, some thousands of accounts on Twitter, X, and then 33 million followers allegedly retweeted it. But then Syracuse University's Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship built a Neo4j network database and traced not only these interactions, but that information was used to sort of piece together the funding, its release, and how it spread. So it's another example of this technology being used to get to the bottom of what's actually going on. With that in mind, Anjana, I know you have strong feelings about the ecosystem of journalism, the ecosystem of information sources, and Melinda's like, yes, we can legislate it, we can get it all done, but we all know it's really slow, it's hard to build consensus. Do you feel, Anjana, that journalism still has a valid place in helping us get to the bottom of what's going on, and what do you think needs to be done to promote more health in that ecosystem?
You know, the standard answers they will say is like the more media literacy, maybe I would add algorithmic literacy, but I think there's also one important thing, that we really need journalists, maybe professors, citizens to come together and demand transparency from the platforms. And how does that transparency happen? Would it take the form of they release some data sets so we can audit what is being, how they're amplifying this information? That could be one. There could be other ways. For example, using known approaches to combat misinformation. There was a way that platforms can do it. And of course, third important thing, without regulation, because we know that self-regulation is not very effective. We know that from companies, when there is self-regulation, yes, that's what we get. So good regulation work, I don't know about regulation, but at least they need some pressure from that. Because, of course, the problem with regulation also in many high technology sectors is that few people will just game the system, and they are going to be getting governmental agencies to write rules in their favor. It's called regulatory capture. So that's also a problem. All these problems exist. But that doesn't mean we should give up. We need at least some transparency where we have this ability as researchers to do
I think that's a really good point about regulation. I think we should actually spend some time thinking about accountability. And so if you think about money in politics, right, think back to the Citizens United case, the ways in which there's unlimited spending now that's permissible by corporations in our elections. And then let's think through the ways in which we're holding companies, donors accountable, right? This is all happening piecemeal. It's wonderful that Michigan was able to pass these legislations through, but it's still being done at different levels of government and not holistically for all of our elections. And I think that is where a lot of the issues lie. Another thing to bring up is the fact that, for instance, in the social sciences, when you run a study, you're subject to an ethics board, right? We have to, if we have deception in our studies, we need to debrief our respondents. We need to tell our subjects that there was deception involved, and this is why there was deception, and this is where it came from, and the purpose of the study is X. This is not the case when it comes to companies. This is not the case when it comes to PACs that are spreading all sorts of misinformation in political advertising. And what's more is it's not necessarily just that the tools are there, the AI tools are there to create these advertisements. It's not just that they are there to create and even come up with some misleading information. It's that politicians then amplify that misinformation. And accountability then is sort of lost, right? If you have an entire system that builds on each other without accountability, without transparency, all of a sudden we're living in a society in which nothing can actually be fact-checked, right? And journalists, to your point, Jana, is they can't possibly keep up with the pace of misinformation in our elections, in our society. And so I think we're really sort of in a pivotal moment when it comes to politics, because while it's wonderful that 90 days before an election you need to watermark an advertisement that uses deepfakes, it's not enough, right? It should be that case all the time. And in fact, it should be impermissible to have any of this type of information out there. To me, these types of issues are akin to defamation. They're akin to these types of litigation that have existed for a very long time. When you impersonate someone and you take over their likeness to disseminate a message that is not coming from them, that violates all sorts of consent. It violates all sorts of norms. And especially in the realm of politics, when we're meant to communicate to our constituents and actually have this principal-agent relationship with constituents who are there to elect us to represent them, that is the most important, the most pure type of relationship that I think we need to protect. And so I think this is just compounded in all these other ways as well.
I wonder if any of you remain hopeful in this era of billionaires who are producing these technologies and engaging users around them are the same people who are buying up a lot of the major news publications and who are shifting their policies on what kind of candidates they endorse. Like when all of that is mixed pickles and it's all like one thing, like how can we hold on to hope? And just one other thought I have about that, and Jana, you and I have been talking about this in this work that I do, where I talk with a lot of people. I was one day talking with a reporter producing an article about the work that we're doing, and they had a fact, and I said, oh, we should fact check that, and they said, oh, well, there's so few fact checkers now in newspapers because the profits have been slashed. Because there's so much competition with social media, there's not much fact-checking going on at this point anymore. And so that's just a further thought to add in. Like, how do we remain hopeful? Are we just waiting on government to save us, and can it do the job? Or maybe you have other thoughts.
I'm going to start with yes, we're going to remain hopeful. In my work right now, there's a lot of anxiety about a lot of things, and I'm like, no, I am going to be aggressively optimistic, because otherwise y'all will just lead us to despair. But I think, so the hope that I see is very clear. It is not in the government fixing things, because that's just not going to happen. But as a resident of Michigan, where we went from having some of the most gerrymandered congressional maps to the most competitive congressional maps through citizen action, I'm going to say that there is still hope because people still care. We still have conversations like this that show like people are worried about these things, they're thinking about these things, which means people are thinking of solutions. And as long as we keep thinking of solutions, we can still implement them. So I'll say to sort of the conversation about like even money in politics, there is work right now in Michigan being done at the grassroots level to address that and try to control not just a lot of this like out of control spending that happens in campaigns. Is that going to be enough on its own? No, but it is a start. And as grassroots action happens and is successful, that momentum also grows and spreads, just like all the negative things that grows and spreads, like we can spread that positive things too. You know, the same kind of a citizen amendment that we did here in Michigan is on the ballot in Ohio right now. If we think about things that spread that way, I think that there is still hope because people want to solve these kinds of problems. Therefore, I think they can. I will also add though, because local journalism is like one of the things I care so much about, that's harder because it's profit driven, and I think that involves a real reset in the public mind space of seeing journalism not as a for-profit institution, but a public good, because it is a public good. When I was in high school, we had AP government. It was like the fourth branch of the government. So I think recalibrating ourselves as a public to think of journalism in that way is part of how we fix that particular issue.
Thank you, Melinda. That is helpful. Well, I really have to thank you, Melinda, for making this. And not only that, I think it's so inspiring that young people like you can make this dystopian thing possibly better. And we have to believe, and I'm sure, maybe things are looking grim. The number one reason I feel worried about democracy is take a billionaire who has enormous investments in all these industries like space, and he also has the ability to influence our electoral process. Is this not an issue of concern for national security? It is a national security issue. Right? Some very famous computer science person said this to me. And he said, I was like, it's true. All of us are thinking. And hopefully that awareness and the efforts of wonderful people gives me the inspiration that these young people are so motivated. Maybe things look grim, but it is the same thing with the Industrial Revolution. We had all these, if you read that novel, North and South, it was, I think, sometime, it talks about in England in the 19th century, they had, in the Manchester and all those places, they had mills, and the relationship between the working class and the factory owners, the conditions, working conditions, what kind of dialogue. So people have talked about those issues, engaged with these kinds of issues. And people will. And so I think, I'm making all these dystopian remarks, so hopefully that will catalyze some change. And there's always these opposing forces. We have to, I'm pretty sure, just like Elizabeth Gaskell wrote North and South, I'm waiting for this great novel somebody will write, or maybe a great podcast, or maybe something else. The modalities have changed. They are not, maybe necessarily not a book, but there will be action because we have wonderful people like you making things better.
Thank you. And very briefly, I think that Citizens United has eroded our democracy. Completely. It has eroded our democracy. The fact that we're talking about a Democratic presidential campaign that had already surpassed $1 billion in donations is a problem for democracy. It is a problem that Elon Musk is contributing $50 million a month to Trump's campaign. It's a problem that there is a lottery now that he is giving to registered voters who agree with his principles, $1 million per day for signing on to his petitions. Like, we have a problem in our democracy when these billionaires are not only using these technologies to enrich themselves, to take over our national security apparatus, but also to influence our elections and our elected officials. Like, this is a massive, massive problem. I don't even think you can call this a democracy anymore. I think it is a matter of urgency that we recognize that citizens no longer have an opportunity to actually have power. And so, yes, we need to get money out of politics. That is the number one thing we need to do. And only then can we start to think about regulation. Only then can we start to think about the ways in which we can protect ourselves as a polity. But as long as these billionaires, many of whom have enriched themselves because of these very technologies that we are here to talk about, as long as they have, our elections as their playground, I really don't know how we can possibly call this a democracy. So unfortunately, I'm just a lot more.
Sounds like a Jiliang. I know sometimes over in your world, you guys partner or propose ideas to big corporations where you see them going wrong, and you do things like, oh, the system's failing in this way. We want to partner with you and produce some research on how it can be improved. Do you have any hope from the inside perspective?
We always have hope, you see, right? That's why.
Unlike Nazira.
But I think that in theory it's possible. There is a risk. Just look at you ready. So nowadays, of course, personally, you saw what you believe. You just saw one. Even we see the same thing, we could have different angles of opinions. On the other hand, nowadays you really can see someone wanting to say. So in practical, in American, probably the risk is nobody's possible. Look at the North Korea. You really only can see something people are just wanting to believe. You see. So I have hope, but I also have some worries. And in theory, it's possible. Yeah.
Well, with that note, I'd like to maybe open it up to the audience if anybody has questions. I'd like to make one concluding remark. I'm going to hang my hope on artificial general intelligence. Maybe it's going to save the day and do a better job than what we've done so far. And in the meantime, over at the Judith Center, we're going to continue having conversations like this. So I'd like to really thank each of you for all of your thoughtfulness and your daily work. It's truly so inspiring for me to meet you and learn about what you're doing. So on that note, I'd like to open it up to the audience if anyone has questions and wants to continue this further at all.
I have a question. Hi. Do you fear that AI will take over your job one day?
That's what I tell them. That's what I tell the students. I tell the students, what is it that we do? How do we ensure that we are still relevant? What can I teach my students that at least allows them to, I don't know, taking over their jobs. Can they at least keep their jobs for the next 5 years? Something I had to passionately think about for myself. And yes, is there going to be like a hollowing out of jobs? Is there going to be a shift in terms of, Julian mentioned it, but now we have a lot of AI generated, it's like, I would call it dual-sided AI. AI and algorithms talking to other AI algorithms, or AI streaming AI. Right? So Instagram content is created and it also has to go through AI filter. Created by AI, going through AI. What are we going to do in that world?
I will say, goodness, yes, I hope so, because I work to pay bills, not because it's what I just want to do with my day. Having said that, in the past, there was this idea that technological revolutions and automations would make it so that people didn't have to work as many hours because the things that needed to be done would be done through technology. So even if we have technology that does, like I do communications, is there a lot that AI could do in my job? Absolutely. Are they going to find new things for people like me to do to justify or continue? our continued existence? Yes, because that's sort of how capitalism works. So honestly, I think it would be great if we could use technology to make people's lives easier so we didn't have to work as many hours just to like exist. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the direction we as a society are heading in.
I have a follow-up question about that. Do you think our society is prepared for AI to take over our jobs? Because I would think that for AI to take over people's jobs, that would necessitate basic income for everyone. To work less hours, they have to get paid some other way to live in our capitalistic society. So do you think society is following that trend as AI is taking over jobs, that society is prepared for that to take care of its citizens?
I would say no, and also putting aside the basic income thing, because that'll lead me down a rabbit hole. I think as technology is changing, new jobs are also becoming a thing. So for example, 5 years ago, AI prompter wasn't a job. Now it is. It's kind of a dumb job, but it is a job. Content creator was not a job 10 years ago. Now it is, and it's wildly a very profitable job. So I don't think that's the direction. I don't think that is how our society is going to evolve to, deal with the fact that technology is changing how our work looks. I think our society is evolving with how technology is changing what work looks like. Unfortunately, not the way I want it to. So I will continue to have a job.
I know you use AI, but the rest of you actually use it?
Use AI?
A lot?
Yeah, we do research with AI.
Okay. Do you use all multimodal things? You're making audio and video? You are. What tools are you using?
But, in the research, of course, we use some of these large language models, and then, not tools, we are building our own tools. I'm sure he's building his own tools as well. So, one of the interesting things that I've studied in my research, and one of the projects, which I thought is really interesting, is the following. There's a lot of healthcare related information on YouTube. Now, let's say you have diabetes. Millions of adults are diagnosed with diabetes. You go to the doctor or you have pre-diabetes. If you go to the doctor, say the doctor will tell you you have pre-diabetes. What is a personalized meal plan, a personalized exercise plan, personalized something else that can be contextualized to your age, gender, etc. That's the big goal. That's a very small part of the problem. There's a lot of health-related information on YouTube on diabetes. If you put diabetes in YouTube, you will get.
Yeah. Yeah.
But can I build the AI tool that will give specific information, contextualize, which is what are the standards I need to build in a tool like that? It has to be understandable by patient education guidelines. It has to be actionable. It has to be medically, it has to at least contain some medical information. So there's an ocean of information. It's too expensive for doctors to create this kind of material for each and every condition. But I can do that using the help of AI. Because there's already a lot of stuff that's out there. Getting the right, filtering for the right video requires, it's like looking for needle in haystack, but it can be done. Now we can go a step even further, although I don't know if somebody can do it. They can take chunks of this good videos, combine it with some large language model, and then can you imagine the possibilities, how personalized advice you can get using what is already out there. Will that help? I suppose it will help. A lot of people do have pre-diabetes. Diabetes is one area where there is a huge gap between, there's all these medical education, but the actual adherence, there's gaps. Millions have been invested in diabetes education. But the adherence of those has really not changed in the last 10 something years. So I just want to give an example because it's a very, very small example. But yes, lots of people can do stuff like this and a lot of other stuff.
I
just wanted to add, like, in the work that I do, you know, I both visited a very large sort of STEM institution involved with biomedical research, and there's massive bias there as well. Like at the student level, it's pretty equal, and as you go to the top, it's mostly men, and it's very important because it impacts the research that's being done. There's a lot of research not performed around women's bodies. On the flip side, a couple weeks ago, I was at a conference outside of Silicon Valley with founders of new technology companies, a private conference sponsored by venture capitalists. And this was fascinating. And I actually left very hopeful. It was like pretty much 20-year-olds. They've all started their next enterprise. But each of them was looking at a different issue not addressed in the society where there really is a great need. And so they've come up with an idea that fills a niche. And I was thinking about your talk about individuals using these systems, but I also see business as a place where change can happen, and it's sort of, as we know in our American capitalist society, it's sanctioned and supported. So I do think there are also inroads in the business world as well, and I left being surprisingly hopeful. And it's sad to think like, oh, at the individual level, maybe we can't do much, or at the legislative level, it's so hard to get consensus. We've got to turn to business as a solution. So I'm not a huge fan of that as a sort of fallback, but I do see it as an additional path forward when some of the other routes aren't working. So.
One example to answer probably both you and the question. So, early this year, I traveled back to East Lansing from Detroit. So at that time, Michigan flyers, last day Michigan flyers was ending much earlier. I have to take a Uber. I take a Uber from Detroit to East Lansing. Then I was very lucky. I get a Tesla driver, and in the highway, and we had some conversations. He was a student from UMN, and he's doing homework while driving me. and I asked him, so why you are a student of UM, why you still be a Uber driver? He said he needed to support himself. He didn't want to have a loan. And we had the conversation. He asked me, what are you doing? I said, I'm working on AI. He said, I never use AI. I told him, who is driving now? So you can say, so to your question, actually we use AI tools more frequently than we think. For example, Face ID is face recognition. Alexa, voice recognition. So we use AI actually much more frequently than us. Tesla's co-pilot. So this is the first to your question. To your question, that student wants to earn money to support his study, and while he wants to do homework, so AI can help. Although I feel very, very nervous the whole way back.
I just want to add to that because, hilariously, this is the second time this week I've been asked that question, and it's Tuesday. But in my work, what I use AI for isn't, what people think. It's not large language models. I use Canva, and sometimes I need to erase the part of the background image of a picture. That is like AI and machine learning. Or, now everything with Google Docs, it'll type in the last words. So when I want to write voters, not politicians 15 times in the same press release, it'll finish off that not politicians for me. So these tools are very much becoming ubiquitous. Even if we're not using those big generative AI tools like a ChatGPT and some of the more headlining things. And even they're right now I think a lot of people use them in little ways that do just make their life a little bit easier, as opposed to thinking about the big ways where I think it's going to, fully transition out different job.
Thank you, Melinda. I'll just add, in my work as an artist, and I have another job as a therapist, those jobs are valued because people want connection, or they want to have the idea that a human made it. So, but we'll see what lies ahead of us, and I think we'll all be doing thinking about what parts of us are replaceable and what parts are essential. So thank you everyone for your attention today and your great questions, and thank you so much to our incredible panelists for all your insights.